At 1,423 hours, in a detention facility near Lüneburg, northern Germany, rain hammered the corrugated roof as Greta Müller stood in the processing line, her Wehrmachthelferin uniform soaked through. She watched the British sergeant at the intake desk, his pen moving carefully across a ledger. When her turn came, he looked up and asked her name through an interpreter. She braced for the slap, the shove, the rough hands she'd been warned about, but instead, he slid a tin cup across the table. Steam rose from it. "Tea," he said in broken German. "You'll want to sit. Processing takes time." The cup was warm in her hands. She didn't understand. None of it made sense anymore. They had been told the British were weak, decadent, cowards who ran at Dunkirk, that captured German women would face brutality. Yet by 1945, over 500,000 German women had served the Wehrmacht as clerks, meteorologists, and anti-aircraft auxiliaries, and now thousands found themselves in British custody expecting vengeance, but receiving something far more confusing. The first crack came within hours. After finishing her tea, real tea, not the ersatz bark brew of wartime Germany, Greta was led to a makeshift medical station where a British Army nurse waited, clipboard in hand. The exam was thorough, but gentle. When Greta flinched, the nurse raised both hands and said softly, "I won't hurt you." The gentleness was undeniable. When a barbed wire wound was found on Greta's arm, the nurse cleaned and dressed it with antiseptic and real bandages. "Come back in 3 days," she said, as if Greta had a future. By 1946, Britain held around 400,000 German prisoners under humane Geneva Convention standards. Inspections were regular, the Red Cross monitored conditions, and mortality rates remained remarkably low. Beyond policy, there was a cultural commitment. How you treat your enemies defines who you are. Greta's group, communications personnel with no war crime ties, was assigned to converted Wehrmacht barracks, sparse but clean. Metal beds, wool blankets, real bread at breakfast. It wasn't luxury, but it was consistent. She worked in the administrative office under a calm, bespectacled British lieutenant who corrected her filing errors with patience, not anger. For women braced for cruelty, decency itself became a kind of psychological torment. The turning point came that June, when British soldiers rotated home. One waved toward the women's compound casual, unlocking. Several women instinctively waved back before realizing enemies weren't supposed to. That night, Greta approached a guard, Private Davies, and asked haltingly, "Why are you kind?" He shrugged. "War's over, in it. You're just people now." She'd been called many things in the Reich, but not just people in a very long time. By August, cooperation earned privileges. Greta was sent to work on a dairy farm in Hampshire owned by an older couple, the Wainwrights. They had lost their son at Arnhem, yet they fed her lunch at their kitchen table. "Wasn't your fault," the farmer said quietly.
"Wasn't ours either. Just the bloody war."
That night, Greta lay awake, trying to summon hatred, and found none. In September, the women were shown a re-education film. Bergen-Belsen, Dachau bodies stacked like cordwood, hollow-eyed survivors. Some turned away, some wept, others denied it. Greta watched in silence. "We chose not to ask questions," she said at last. That was the heart of it. They'd all chosen obedience over doubt. By 1947, 796 marriages between German POWs and British citizens were registered. Enemies were becoming neighbors, even family. Greta met Thomas, a British sergeant with ink-stained fingers and quiet humor. They spoke over tea breaks, never crossing lines, yet understanding each other more than expected. "What will you do after?" he asked. She had no answer. Her home was rubble, her family gone. Perhaps she thought there was nothing left to return to. By late 1946, standing before a mirror in the women's washroom, Greta barely recognized herself. Color returned to her cheeks, eyes alive again. The enemy had restored her health while her homeland lay in ruins. The British had won by refusing to become what they fought. Their restraint had demolished her certainty. She found Davies again by the fence. "Thank you," she said, "for treating us like people." He shrugged awkwardly. "Just doing my job, love." But it wasn't just a job. It was a choice. Repatriation began soon after. Greta chose to stay, not because she'd stopped being German, but because the Germany she believed in no longer existed. She settled in Hampshire, worked the Waywright farm, and later married a kind, ordinary local man. Years later, in 1962, her daughter asked, "Were you scared when you were captured?" Greta thought for a long moment. "Yes," she said, "but not of what I expected. I was scared because they were kind, and kindness from an enemy is the most dangerous weapon of all." She poured her daughter a cup of real tea, strong and dark. "Remember," she said, "how people treat you when they don't have to. That's who they really are. Your grandfather fought them, but when they won, they didn't gloat. They didn't take revenge. They just made tea." The cup of tea Greta held that first day wasn't just a drink. It was a declaration that even in defeat, human dignity would be honored. Because sometimes, the strongest weapon is the one you choose not to use.